Pan for Pearl does loads of like really interesting stuff that no one's recreated in the last 10 years.
Guys, we're gonna.
One addition. I think one thing that will help us with at least the security concerns about using NPM is when NPM adopts something like Maven does with package signing and stuff like this, so we can like assure our clients that this thing is like really the thing that we said it's going to be there, and not something different because someone hijacked it or so.
Well, it solves the sort of man in the middle issue, but it doesn't solve the fact that someone might have compromised the person who was uploading it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, isn't it? I find it always fascinating.
Guys, sorry, I'm getting thrashed to get to the new topic.
Okay,
it's cool. So we could go to the audience again, and I think this is a pretty exciting question. Oh, I guess I'm not going to the audience. I guess I'm supposed to ask Kyle Simpson to ask a question.
Like I said, they put me on the panel so that I could stir things up. So I get the pleasure of asking this question. There's a mini browser wars going on right now between Grunt and Gulp, and we toyed around with having you all have to stand up and declare where you are on that, but we won't. But there's several other would-be contenders, and that sort of betrays this idea that maybe there is one right build tool to rule them all. So the question is that a realistic idea that we're striving towards one great build tool that we need to find, or is it just idealistic? And is it harmful fragmentation or useful experimentation?
I think that traditionally having multiple tools is a good thing because it drives innovation, and I don't think that that's a bad thing in this community. Build tooling on the front end is still very young, and it's somewhat in its infancy. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. One thing I would like to see is us sort of standardizing on perhaps a task specification. I know that there's been some effort from different build tools to standardize on the node task spec, which talks about things like having a single way to handle records or logging or notifications and so forth. I think that could actually help us avoid having to sort of have this sort of crazy wheel of re-implementing things all the time, but I know it has its own challenges.
I have an opinion on the Gulp and Grunt thing, which is I don't care. I don't use either of them, and I see these tools as useful for certain situations, but they are kind of glue that sticks together interesting things. I think the discussion and browser war type arguments going on, well, I'm not sure if anyone's really arguing, but arguments going on between these things really distract from why we're even doing a build process in the first place. Like, we're doing it to get faster websites, to get better development time and so on. If you use Grunt, if you use Make, if you use Ant, I don't care. It's like what we actually do in the build process, which is actually important. I would personally like to see less people re-implementing Grunt coffee, Gulp coffee, whatever, and just have coffee. Like, just use that and hook into it any way you want.
So you feel like we should get closer to the grain and just actually like call the existing tools rather than writing like wrappers around this? It seems to be what you're saying.
Like, the wrappers are fine, but just recognize that they are just wrappers. The important thing is what it's wrapping and what that actually does, and how you can plug these things together is just details.
There was a write-up some months ago about, it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but it was tasks.js, which boiled down to simply just writing the JavaScript yourself. And while it was funny and sort of interesting from a boilerplate perspective, I think what it does miss a little bit, the reason I write tools and the reason I would make a Grunt plugin for my tool is not because that's the only way to use my tool. It's because I'm trying to lower the barrier to entry so that I get bigger market share. I'm trying to make it so there's as little boilerplate as possible to drop my template engine in. Of course, some people, and I might have the same perspective, but some people would say, well, it's okay to raise the barrier a little bit. If you want to use it, you have to know how to use it. Call the API, well document the API. So I think that's the reason why plugins exist. Everybody wants to make it so that their tool is the one that blows up and gets 10 million stars on GitHub.
Sebastian, you had a comment there.
I mean, the thing is, with all these dependencies, with all these plugins, when we say, okay, we have a common interface, so we only have one plugin that works with all of the build systems, perfect. I mean, in the end, it's a tool, and a tool should help us. So if I like hammer B better in my hand than hammer A, then I use hammer B because it's better for me. And the same is it with Grunt and Gulp and Broccoli and Fess or whatever. I mean, if you're a Node developer, Gulp.js feels more familiar with all the stream stuff, and so you can write it because it feels more familiar. And if you're a front-end developer, most of them like Grunt more because it's like this declarative approach where you only have to configure things. And I think it comes down to use the right tool for the job.
Okay, can I go to the audience here? Because there's like a bunch of hands going up. Just first over here, and then Remy.
Well, my question was actually
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so disclaimer, unfortunately, I'm one of these people who has also developed another build tool called Plumber. So I agree with everything we've said, and I think the idea of having interop between plugins is great. One thing to remember is that these tools are there to make it really easy for people. We want people who are scared by the command line to be able to do the right thing by default without having to worry about configuring crazy paths everywhere. So to me, what the real question is, what is the good baseline for these tasks that would work in different tools so that it does the right things? And just to throw a few examples is, should it be able to produce source maps correctly for everything by default? Should it be able to rebuild partially so you don't have to rebuild all your things every time? And all these things, I think, need to feed into what is the common sort of format for these big tools.
I think one of the really big challenges with coming up with a spec for build processes and that task spec is that it's difficult to create something that is flexible enough to also match the architectures of these different tools so that they can work under, behind the scenes and do what they need to do without necessarily feeling overly constrained. And unfortunately, so the node task spec idea that I talked about earlier, that's actually something that is currently on hold because none of the build tools could actually reach agreement on how they should approach this problem. It's really, really difficult. I'm hoping that later on in the year they'll come back to it and think that it's something worth value.
We talk about sort of like, oh, it's good to have multiple tools because that breeds innovation. Don't think you can't get locked into an open source tool, because you can. It's not just commercial stuff. Like we talk about lock-in. You get yourself locked in by something by saying, like, you know what, the barrier to moving from this tool is so great, I'm not going to do it. At which point you benefit not one bit from the innovation coming from other tools.
Okay, can I get a quick comment from the audience here from Remy Sharp?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, I don't personally use build tools at the moment. There's one step, but the thing is, jQuery it was the tool that made working with JavaScript really stupid simple for a large amount of people, and suddenly they were able to write JavaScript without writing JavaScript. And these build tools have given me a way of just adding minification and getting that done, whereas before I wouldn't have done it, and many other people are going to be doing that. You talk about getting locked in. I don't think it matters at this point. The build, like getting hold of build tools at this point is so new for this community. If we get locked into Grunt for a few years and eventually there's standardization in 5 years' time, then that's a huge step forward compared to just not doing it at all and just delivering massive images over wire, uncompressed images. We're still at that I think we're still at that very early days of when jQuery was kind of released for JavaScript.
I agree with that. I feel like this build tool conversation sometimes it skips over the fact that we don't talk enough about what's inside our build process. Like we should be caring more about like image optimization, image compression. I mean, that's the thing. Images are the thing that are like slowing down the web today. And we need to get more people caring about those problems and spend more time talking about like how we can actually speed up our pages and less time perhaps on, arguing why you should be using Gulp versus Grunt. I mean, they're still fantastic tools, but as I think Sebastian said earlier, people who are more familiar with Node are perhaps going to use Gulp, and people who aren't are just going to use Grunt, and that seems to be working.
I'm going to cut you guys off because actually the next question I think goes into just what Adi was touching on. I'm looking from the audience. Peter Mueller?
I will have to read this as well because it's been changed a bit. Most build scripts, including those generated by scaffolding, are a chain of several discrete steps. Do we even need the complexity of having control of every one of these steps? Or should we instead have an opinionated build chain that just gets us to the endpoint that we're interested in?
Let's go with Nick.
So like from my experience, like I've built an opinionated tool chain for our own build system that we needed. And I'm really happy with it. There's been a lot of work put into it, obviously, but I think in the end, you actually get, like if you really want to get total performance out of your build process, not in terms of how fast it runs or anything like that, but in terms of what actually executes at the end of your build process, then I think that's definitely a very smart way to go. And you definitely don't need any particular tools like Grunt or Gulp to get you there.
Mm-hmm. Kyle had a comment at the start.
Yeah, I was, so I think going back to the Unix philosophy, which certainly informs a lot of what we're doing, it says have lots of tiny little tools that can be woven together. And I think that's the more appropriate way of doing this. When you get to the point where you've decided that there is a particular flow through those tools that makes sense for you, you write yourself a bash script so you don't have to repeat it again. And that's all you need. And in the JavaScript world, when you have a set of API calls through these different tools, you just write yourself a little node script that repeats that process over and over. So I don't think we need to worry so much about, oh, there's too many details here. You just wrap a script around it, and then you don't have to worry about those
I think the thing
details
is,
if you don't want.
you said for me and I write, and I think actually sharing that unit for some people is really valuable. Some people in this room are going to go like, I'm a really good programmer, and that's exactly what they're going to do. And some people, and like Remy was saying, some people, like in this room or not, are going to go like, I have no idea what all these steps are doing.
So I just
but I want the magic from people who are really smart to do it for me.
No, I just make a gist, and then I tweet it out. That's my solution.
So one of the things that we tried to do with
You reach the non-technical people.
Yeah. Distributing really usable software is hard. Packaging that up into a sort of something that is just easily usable off the shelf by someone who does not understand what's going on in the middle is hard work. But like it's valuable. And there's probably instead of these millions of plugins, there's probably 2 or 3 good ways that would be good enough for 80% of the people.
So one of the things we tried doing with Yeoman is actually trying to provide people with like opinionated workflows, especially when it comes to things like performance and what we think people should be doing. Because a lot of people don't know exactly what they should be getting in their build process to actually keep their pages fast and so forth, or what build tasks they should be using, whether you're using like Grunt or Gulp. And so there do exist solutions to help you with opinionated stacks for this stuff, but at the end of the day, if you find those too much and too overbearing, you can always just use them for reference, right? In the same way that people use HTML5 boilerplate. Just take what you want, delete, keep friendly the rest.
Mm-hmm. Just going to go back to Peter here.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on Carl's point about the Unix philosophy. I love the Unix philosophy, small tools, being able to chain them together. The thing is that Unix pipes work with text, and webs of files are not text. We would need to be able to pass objects like we can do in PowerShell.
Yeah, as well.
Because the thing is, some of the things that are really, really difficult to do with the existing build tools, revving files, concatenating files, all that stuff, are things that both Grunt and Gulp do really badly, actually, because they're based essentially on a continuation of the Unix philosophy or the makefile philosophy.
Like I touched on earlier, like steal things from things outside your community, and one of the things to steal from is PowerShell, because for those that that are familiar with sort of like that Unix philosophy of sort of chaining small things together, PowerShell adds basically a full object in between those things, and you can do a lot more with that.
But I don't think we need that. If you look